As you know, if you were here last week, I began a 9-week sermon. It was easier to do it over 9 weeks than all at once because you'd still be here. And so the theme is living into Shalom. And if I reminded you, Shalom means the richness and fullness of all that God can offer you. So when you say Shalom to somebody, it means not only peace, but it means something deeper, as all Hebrew does. So if I offer you Shalom, as I will when we share the peace, which is a translation of the word Shalom, I am saying to you, I offer you the richness and fullness of all that God has to offer you. And in order to make that happen, I better learn to listen. Did you catch the word listen in the gospel? As you were listening to the gospel, did you count how many times the word listen was said? Or listening? Yeah, quick, look it up. Counting now. I had to go back and look too. There's 4, it's mentioned 4 times. So it's kind of like a trick question to say, did you listen? Now, those of you who have children or worked in organizations like the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts, one of the great lessons that you get to teach is, why do you have 2 ears and 1 mouth? Why do you have 2 ears and 1 mouth?
Listen more than you speak.
Yes, listen more than you can speak. Math scholars, why do you have 2 ears and 1 mouth? To listen twice as hard. All right, so you've really got to work on listening. Think about it. St. Anne's is in a period right now of deep listening. Listening to God and to one another. Think about the work that you have done so far to listen to God and to one another as you are preparing to anticipate, to find, to discern who will be here as the next rector of this marvelous parish. And that takes a lot of work. So some of it has already been done by filling out forms and talking to people, but continuing to listen is really important. It's a very hard skill to work up and do. Now, as I was explaining to you last week what it is to become who you are, I pointed out that the Apostle Paul was not too much fun when he was Saul, but then he had his moment with Jesus and started to give us great gifts, such as what he wrote last week as a blueprint for how we should live our lives. Or how he continues to say, love your neighbor, and extols the notion of love. And what is but love if it's not grounded in listening and caring for one another? And if you don't listen well, the first passage that we heard from Exodus was what? Thank you. The Passover. If you had forgotten to put the blood of the lamb over your lintel on your house, what would have happened back? You would have lost a child. You can see how that worked to get the Egyptians' attention, to let my people go. So listening is a really important skill to develop. We are only as good as we have been trained to be. And you think about what the models are that give us an understanding of who and what we are. Again, the model of Paul, when he was Saul, was to be a Pharisee, to be very legalistic. But as he became a follower of Jesus, he began to open and see more things. And I gave you the first half of a story from my own life with my mother, and my mother and the wooden spoon. And how she used that to keep the oldest of the 6 boys, me, and my 2 next brothers. So the first 3. And the flinching story that when she raised her arm once, she said, I never used the wooden spoon. Okay. The younger 3 got away with it. Anyway, we'll leave that for what it's worth for another time. But the point that I forgot to tell you, or actually it's appropriate to bring in now, because it became something that, what do I listen to guide me? What do you listen to guide you? What principles? What is it from the sayings of Jesus that would speak to you, that would help you make the right decisions? You have the 10 Commandments. You have love your neighbor as yourself. Love God. You've got all those things, and then living into them is really hard. And every once in a while, you get a moment of clarity when maybe you're given an opportunity to step back and look at a decision you may have made that may not have been the best in keeping with who you understand yourself to be. Now, my example is not I was a good Christian example. It was I was 15 years old, and remember, I was only as good as I'm trained, and yet I was trying to live into the Boy Scout oath. Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country and to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. I am so blessed that that became part of me because I have a hard time memorizing things. But when I was 15, I was the dining hall steward at Camp Buckskin in upstate New York, a Boy Scout camp. And I had done a pretty good job getting all the troops in and out for all of their meals until one day, one little boy, what am I? I'm 15, he might have been 12, 11, like one of my younger brothers. He got in my face about something. And what do you think I did?
You got back in his face.
I not only got back in his face, I slapped him. And it was like the heat on my hand. It was a good learning experience because it helped me realize that's not who I think I am. And where did I learn to do that? What did the world teach me? What did other people teach me? I used the term last week, retributive and restorative. Those are big overarching terms. What is it to bring love? What is it to listen to the principles that guide us? Did I live into the Scout oath and the Scout law, which I just told you? No. Did I live into what now became part of me as one who stands before you as a follower of Jesus? This listening thing, which restores people to us or can tell people their behavior is inappropriate and they better change. That's what the gospel is all about. We have a huge responsibility with that. But listening carefully to God and one another, and often the God part comes through listening to one another, is really hard work. Did you notice I'm human? Anybody catch that? Anybody else here human? Oh, yes. Everybody that's human, raise your hand. It's okay. Thank you very much. I'm glad we were in agreement on that. That's good. Okay. Because I want you to know how hard it is to do this listening thing. Remember, how many ears do I have? And how many mouths do I have? Thank you for the privilege of letting me talk right now. But I better make sure I use the 2 ears and the 1 mouth. This is a story about entering into a congregation as an ordained person. Somebody who ought to know better. Part of your work when you welcome in your new pastor, and part of the work your new pastor ought to do when that person enters into the congregation. When I went to Charleston, West Virginia to St. Matthew's in 2003, I'd come out of a wonderful environment in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Don't talk to me about the Crimson Tide and the football game last night. That's past. And that congregation had been warm. We did a lot of singing. I could get behind the altar and say, "The Lord be with you." And they would respond back, "And also with you." It's called chanting in the church. There are some places that like it. And guess what? There are some places that don't. But it was fulfilling for me. The fact that my voice had actually come out. There's a longer story in there as well. And so I got to this church in Charleston, and guess what? I found the group of people to ask the question, what do you think would be good here if I chanted, "The Lord be with you"? And they went, "Well, we like that." And I stopped asking questions. I got behind the altar. I did it. And you know how many voices sang with me? Guess what? The 5 people I talked to. And that became a ripple of, you've been ordained long enough. Maybe you should have listened better. And it took some time to find better norms and to grow and learn, all of us together, because I wasn't the only one that had problems with listening, because that's a human condition. But if we listen carefully to God, and in listening carefully to God, we may just hear what we need to hear, even if we don't want to hear it. And you think about how often Jesus says something. Look at how the people of his time somehow responded to things he told them. And so it's not unlike us saying the same thing. There is a rule of life, many rules of life, but one of them is the rule of Saint Benedict. Maybe you've heard of Benedictine spirituality. It's the gathering of Christian community about the 600s. So it's about, 1,400 years old. Monasteries, abbots, great stories and abuses and coming back. But there's a brilliance to the flexibility of the rule. And I have here in my hand, I'm going to read you and close because I think the rule of St. Benedict helps us listen better by understanding our relationships better and how we care for one another and the types of things that are discussed in the gospel, among other things. But this is written by an Episcopal lawyer, John McWisdon II. He wrote it over 20 years ago, I think. It's a meditation. It guided him on how to live his life. And it has the wisdom in almost poetic form. So it's not like the rule, the way the book is written, which is very good to read. But I really think the first rule fits today because it has a phrase in it. It says, attend to these instructions, listen with the heart and the mind. They are provided in a spirit of goodwill. Listen with, another expression is the ear of the heart, which is another way of saying, what are your values? What helps you make your decisions? What guides you when you go forward? How do you listen to what Jesus taught you in order to make your decisions? How was it I could move through having hit that child, slapped him, and never have struck a child since? Because I wanted to be congruent with what my heart and mind said. And I'm still working on it. So I'll close with this marvelous little piece. Attend to these instructions. Listen with the heart and the mind. They are provided in a spirit of goodwill. These words are addressed to anyone who is willing to renounce the delusion that the meaning of life can be learned. Whoever is ready to take up the greater weapon of fidelity to a way of living that transcends understanding. The first rule is simply this: live this life and do whatever is done in a spirit of loving kindness. Abandon attempts to achieve security, they are futile. Give up the search for wealth, it is demeaning. Quit the search for salvation, it is selfish. And come to comfortable rest in the certainty that those who participate in this life with an attitude of compassion will receive its full promise. When you are invited to live into Shalom, the full promises, the richness and fullness of all that God has to offer you. And that can be found here and now, and quite often when you least expect it and need it most. All these words I offer in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.